피터 아티아의 팟캐스트에 맥길 박사 나오셔서 데드리프트에 관해 말씀하신 내용 중 일부가 논란이 되었는데요. 피터 아티아는 본인의 경험을 예로 들며 400파운드의 데드리프트를 꼭 할 필요는 없지만 데드리프트는 훌륭한 운동이기에 계속해야 한다 라는 생각과 다른 운동들로도 적은 위험으로 모든 근육들을 동원하는 좋은 움직임을 만들어낼 수 있으니 데드리프트를 꼭 할 필요는 없다는 두 생각으로 계속 고민이고, 본인 같은 50대 뿐만 아니라 평범한 사람들의 이런 고민에 대해 어떻게 생각하는지 맥길 박사께 여쭤봤고, 맥길 박사는 이 질문에 대해 최대 중량으로 데드리프트를 들어올리면 생길 수 있는 문제점으로 대답해 주시며 데드리프트를 하지 말라고 말씀하신 것 같이 보였어요. 그래서 이 영상이 올라오고 나서 당시 여러 전문가들이 반박 의견을 많이 공유해 주셨고 저희 채널에서도 한번 소개해 드렸었습니다. 그중 E3 rehab 재활 전문 채널에서 아예 맥길 박사께 메일을 보내 피터 아티아의 팟캐스트에서 하신 말씀들에 대해 부연 설명을 요청했고, 다시 이 내용에 대해 이야기할 자리가 만들어지게 되었습니다. 그럼 이 논란에 대한 맥길 박사의 답변을 같이 한번 들어보겠습니다.
I went home at night thinking, oh, I wish I could have every one of those questions back again with an hour to think of a good answer. It is what it is. So this is the time to clarify a few things. And that's my objective today. Not to make excuses, because I said what I said. But Peter had told his story about deadlifting, very heavy, terrible, devastating pain, and his wanting to set personal bests and that kind of thing. So my response, that's where my brain was for Peter in that. And I didn't expand the discussion to the general population, which was my misstep at the moment. I'm not opposed to any kind of exercise. I don't love or hate deadlifts or squats or, we're sitting here in BackFit Pro HQ. We can go for a tour if you want. We program all of those things. But in our world, everyone who comes here has back pain.
맥길 박사는 비슷한 내용의 설명을 이어가셨고, E3 rehab 채널의 크리스 박사가 정리해서 질문해 주셨는데요.
Let me know if this is correct, but it sounds like deadlifts aren't inherently injurious from your perspective. It's when there's this excessive load mismanagement of doing too much too soon, doing too much of loads that people aren't prepared for, potentially in positions that they haven't adapted to. That's when it's concerning, and that's when you tend to pull back. But in these other populations, you're promoting resistance training, you're promoting individuals that need to do this in their daily life. Is that fair to say, Stu?
100% correct. I didn't do a good job.
이어서 맥길 박사는 부연 설명을 해주시겠다고 하며 프리젠테이션을 준비해 오셨습니다. 좋은 강의 형식이 되어버린 팟캐스트 영상이었는데요. 모두 주옥 같은 내용들이지만 너무 길어 일부 내용을 요약해봤습니다.
I couldn't care less if a person wants to touch their toes, do deadlifts, or if they don't have pain. But people only see me because I'm a pain specialist. So if there's pain, if I then perform a pain provocation test, just a simple test like this, they sit and slouch, and that replicates their back pain. And in fact, it replicates or triggers a radiating symptom in their little left toe. Now I am concerned about that. So it's all within the context of pain. So if we were to look at the ball and socket, and it's no coincidence that either side of the spine is a ball and socket joint, the hips and shoulders, which are made for developing power through a range of motion. I get that. But the disc is not a power generating structure. It's an adaptable fabric, and it's a composite. If a person has a virgin spine, no question, they can adapt a bit more mobility and a bit more load bearing. But once the initial cascade has begun, you're only managing it, is my opinion. And this is now why I'm going to say this. And now we can go right to deadlifts. If we look at people deadlifting, and excessively, the first injury that usually occurs is not to the disc per se, it's to the bone, the trabecular structure right underneath the end plate. So I did say in my ATIA podcast, end plate health is very important, and let me show why. So this is a high-resolution CT micrograph, which most radiologists don't have the privilege of working with. And we loaded this specimen. This was a pig spine because I couldn't find any human volunteers. And we loaded it to a level commensurate with about double body weight deadlift. And you can see how the bone matrix underneath the end plate fractures up a little bit, and there's height loss. Now, very important distinction. Is that a good thing or is it a bad thing? It's a good thing if we learn a lesson from an elite powerlifter who will get microfractures, but they leave several days between heavy training sessions, and the bone will form a callus, and the radiologist will say, oh, this poor person has sclerotic bone in their end plates. And I'll say, no, they're an adapted load-bearing athlete. That's what they did. But the next person keeps training, maybe one day off between exposures, and these microfractures accumulate. Well, when that microfracture occurs, it allows an ingrowth of blood vessels, which once again, it's like the old Chinese farmer's proverb. I don't know if you've ever heard that. It could be good, it could be bad. I will follow that idea of blood vessel growth and invagination of nerves being good or bad. But there's definitely more load on the facet joints. We've measured that as many others have as well. There's less nerve space. The lateral foramen is compromised. There's a decreased nutrition flow across the end plate of the disc. There's a radical change in the biomechanics and neutral zone behavior, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But my point is, this could be a beneficial adaptation, but it's not really. It's a healing process. Or they could be developing cumulative microtrauma, and it has entirely everything to do with the programming from the strength and conditioning specialist or the PT or whoever is doing that. Disc bulges most often start as end plate damage from excessive compression. So this was in my mind in the Peter Attia podcast. Once the end plate has been damaged, it's now essential that there be loaded flexion cycles to carry that material through the delaminated collagen. And this is a dynamic disc designs model. It's about the most biofidelic model. Specimen is flexed. You'll see hydraulically the effort pushing the nucleus through. But if they don't flex, you can now bear heavy compressive load. So again, the style of deadlifts and lifting and whatnot become very important if the person has this particular type of damage and cascade going on.
이후 E3 리헵 채널의 마크 박사가 두 가지 질문해 주셨는데 질문이 너무 길어 제가 요약해 봤습니다. 반복적인 플렉션 로디드 사이클, 요추 굴곡 부하 사이클이 척추, 종판, 디스크 손상을 야기한다는 건 우리 모두 동의하는 내용이며 티핑 포인트로 설명하신 우리 몸의 수용 능력과 최적의 부하 설정이 중요하다는 것인데요. 단순히 데드리프트뿐만 아니라 특정 저항 운동들에서도 역시 티핑 포인트를 넘어서는 과도한 부하가 문제가 되는 건가요?
Everything in biology requires stress. It requires load. Psychologically, we require stress. Our hormonal system requires stress. Our bones, our joints, everything, our teeth all require stress. But every system has a tipping point. If the stress is below the tipping point, it's anabolic. It's wonderful. If it exceeds the tipping point, it's catabolic. Injuries accumulate, stress accumulates, and not good things happen. So our job with what we do is to understand the relationship of load, which ultimately gets down to tissue strain, and manage it. And you manage it by magnitude, repetition, duration, appropriate rest. But if a person injures, the tipping point lowers. Now the balance point changes, and the options that we have to stay under the tipping point decrease.
이어서 마크 박사의 두 번째 질문입니다. 몇몇 물리치료사분들이나 환자분들이 요추 굴곡을 피하고 두려워하는 우려를 발전시키고 있습니다. 어제 원격 상담을 했던 어떤 분은 척추를 구부리는 것을 피하도록 이야기 들어왔고 버드독 운동을 하고 있었어요. 그런데 제가 봤을 때 그분에게 특별한 문제는 없었거든요. 물론 요추 굴곡을 최소화하는 게 그분에게 도움이 될 수 있겠지만 요추 굴곡이 그에게 손상이나 증상에 기여하는 것 같아 보이진 않았습니다. 이런 것들을 피하라는 주장은 사람들이 당신의 이론에 대한 오해나 오용에서 비롯된 것인가요?
Yeah, I don't know where this comes from. I think it comes from people discussing who don't really understand what it is we do. If we determine that flexion or loaded flexion is their pain trigger, we avoid it to wind down their symptoms, sensitivity, and whatnot. Do we have a chance to adapt their spine so eventually they can flex it? I hope the previous presentation will show not so much as we have to manage it. Okay, now we're going to manage that. And it's a matter of coaching. And again, I know some people don't like me using anecdotes, but I think of say you take a triathlete who they have had a flexion intolerant causing disc bulge. They can't ride a bike. It's not possible. So we slowly we wind them down with avoidance, and then we build them back up with exposing them to the bike. Now, I'm going to back off deadlifts for them because I think it will compromise their ability to get back onto the bike. Adding more compression from the deadlift and resistance training, but then we use typically a 3-day rolling cycle. So we'll take that particular triathlete and say, go ride a bike for 5 minutes first day. Let's see if you're robust enough to do it. Day 2, audit your body. Don't ride a bike. That's the adaptation day, and that's the trick of it all. If you get a green light, day 3, ride the same exposure, but add 10%. Day 4, audit. If you get the green light, don't train anymore. That's the adaptation day, etc. So it's a 3-day rolling cycle. Sometimes we'll use a longer rolling cycle. And then let's say that person found their limit. Okay, you found your limit, but it was only a 10-minute more exposure. They don't blow up the previous 3 months of rehab. They just have a little bit of a tweak. And, we all accept that. That's fine. And then we repeat the procedure. They wind it down a lot faster because it's only a very minor tweak, and we get right back onto the re-exposure. So I don't think anyone can criticize our success with, people who need flexion. Think of a jiu-jitsu player. They need loaded flexion. So I think your question also was fear avoidance. And that, to me, it just came from bad coaching. Oh, don't ever flex your spine. I don't think we say that. I think we say very strategically, here are some movement hacks. So when you tie your shoe, put your foot up on the bench, move your hips in, and it gets us a faster wind down of the symptoms. That's what we're all about. I hate to say it, but I think there are some people who really misrepresent our material for their own perception, perhaps.
맥길 박사의 팟캐스트는 3개의 영상으로 제작되었는데요. 향후 더 다루실지는 모르겠지만 저는 맥길 박사가 이전에 데드리프트에 관해 왜 그렇게 말씀하셨는지에 관련된 2번째 영상을 참고했는데요. 관심 있으신 분들은 고정 댓글에 링크를 연결해 놓을 테니 한번 확인해 보시고요. 오늘 내용 한번 정리해 보겠습니다. 데드리프트뿐만 아니라 특정 저항 운동들에서도 티핑 포인트를 넘지 않는 트레이닝 후 회복하고 적응할 수 있는 강도의 최적의 운동 프로그램 설정이 중요하겠습니다. 당연히 기본적으로 부상을 야기하지 않는 정확한 자세가 우선시 되겠죠. 정확한 데드리프트 자세에 대한 여러 전문가들의 내용을 정리한 영상이 저희 트레인스토밍 채널에 있으니 참고해보시면 좋을 것 같습니다. 오늘 영상은 여기까지 준비했는데요. 앞으로도 도움이 되실 만한 내용들이 있으면 잘 정리해서 컨텐츠로 제작해보도록 하겠습니다. 그리고 저와 같이 건강해지고 싶으신 분들은 채널을 꼭 구독해주시고 지켜봐주시면 감사하겠습니다.